In the darkened alleys of New Orleans, where shadows whispered ancient secrets and the scent of blood lingered in the humid air, lived a formidable vampire killer named Seraphina Nightshade. Born into a long line of vampire hunters, Seraphina had dedicated her life to eradicating the undead, seeking revenge for the night her family was slaughtered by a particularly vicious vampire clan. Seraphina was a striking figure, with raven black hair that cascaded down her shoulders like a waterfall of shadows and eyes the color of stormy nights. Clad in black leather and armed with an arsenal of silver-tipped weapons, she moved through the city like a wraith, a silent guardian against the encroaching darkness. The vampire world trembled at the mere mention of Seraphina's name, for she had earned a reputation as a relentless and skilled hunter. Her every step was a dance with death, and her every breath held the promise of vengeance. However, fate had a cruel sense of humor, and Seraphina's world was about to be turned upside down by an unexpected twist. One moonlit night, while on the trail of a notorious vampire nest, Seraphina found herself face to face with her sworn enemy, the charismatic and enigmatic vampire lord, Lucius Draven. Tall and seductive, with midnight black hair and eyes that gleamed with centuries of experience, Lucius exuded an aura of power that sent shivers down the spines of those who dared to cross his path. As Seraphina confronted Lucius in a decaying mansion, the air crackled with tension. Silver clashed against fangs, and for a moment it seemed like the final battle between the forces of light and darkness. Yet, in the midst of the chaos, something unexpected happened. Time seemed to freeze, and their eyes locked in a magnetic gaze. In that suspended moment, a realization dawned upon Seraphina. Lucius Draven was not just a monster, but a creature burdened by the weight of his own existence. The lines between hunter and prey blurred, and a spark of curiosity ignited in Seraphina's heart. What twisted fate had brought them together in this macabre dance? As the dust settled and the remnants of the vampire nest crumbled, Seraphina and Lucius found themselves standing in a pool of moonlight, caught in a silent truce. The air buzzed with unspoken words, and an invisible thread connected their destinies. Over the following nights, Seraphina and Lucius's encounters evolved from deadly skirmishes to clandestine meetings in the shadows. Each meeting was a precarious dance on the edge of danger, where trust wove its fragile threads between them. As they spoke, a tentative understanding blossomed, and Seraphina discovered the tortured history that bound Lucius to the vampire world. Lucius, it seemed, was not always a creature of the night. Centuries ago, he had been a nobleman, cursed by a vengeful witch after a tragic love affair turned sour. Forever denied the solace of death, he wandered through the ages, a creature trapped between the worlds of the living and the undead. The revelation sparked a flicker of empathy in Seraphina's heart. Her hatred for vampires had blinded her to the nuances of their existence, and she began to see Lucius as more than just a monster. His curse mirrored her own sense of isolation, born from the ashes of her family's massacre. As their secret meetings continued, a forbidden connection blossomed between Seraphina and Lucius. They found solace in the darkness, sharing stories of love, loss, and the relentless passage of time. The walls that had once separated them crumbled, revealing vulnerabilities that transcended their roles as hunter and hunted. However, the world they inhabited was not one that tolerated such fragile alliances. The vampire hunting community, led by a zealous and dogmatic leader named Gabriel Cross, was determined to eradicate every last vampire without question or mercy. Seraphina's burgeoning feelings for Lucius became a dangerous secret, one that could lead to her ostracization or even death. It was only a matter of time before Seraphina and Lucius were exposed. The news spread like wildfire, igniting a war between the hunters and the vampires. The city became a battleground, with clashes between hunters and vampires escalating into a full-fledged war. The once covert struggles in the shadows spill into the open streets, leaving a trail of destruction and chaos. The war paints the city in shades of crimson, as the lines between predator and prey blur in the chaos of conflict. Caught between the expectations of her bloodline and the desires of her heart, Seraphina faced an agonizing choice. Could she betray everything she had ever known for the sake of a love deemed unholy by the world? The internal struggle mirrored the external threats closing in on them, as Gabriel Cross intensified his campaign against the vampire presence in New Orleans alongside the war. As tensions escalated, Seraphina and Lucius found themselves entangled in a web of deceit and betrayal. Friends became enemies, and enemies became reluctant allies, as the lines between right and wrong blurred. The fate of their forbidden love hung in the balance, and the looming threat of a war between hunters and vampires cast a dark shadow over their fragile bond. In the midst of the chaos, Seraphina and Lucius clung to each other, determined to defy the forces that sought to tear them apart. Love, they discovered, was a force more potent than any curse or vendetta. It transcended the boundaries of mortality and immortality, forging a connection that defied logic and reason. As the final confrontation between hunters and vampires loomed, Seraphina and Lucius faced a choice that could alter the course of their lives. Would they succumb to the expectations of their respective worlds, or would they stand together against the tide of hatred and prejudice? The climactic battle unfolded in the heart of New Orleans, a battleground where centuries-old grudges clashed with the hope of a different future. Seraphina, armed with the knowledge that love could be a catalyst for change, confronted Gabriel Cross in a desperate attempt to bridge the gap between humanity and the supernatural. In a twist of fate, Lucius, driven by his own desire for redemption, stood alongside Seraphina. The vampire lord, once the embodiment of darkness, embraced the possibility of a new dawn. The alliance between hunter and vampire became a symbol of defiance against the rigid boundaries that had defined their worlds for centuries. The battle was fierce and unforgiving, but in the end, love prevailed over hatred. As the dust settled and the echoes of conflict faded, Seraphina and Lucius still stood together, their blood-bound hearts beating as one. The world around them shifted, and the once clear lines between hunter and hunted blurred into shades of grey. In the aftermath, Seraphina faced the consequences of her choices. The vampire hunting community, rocked by the revelation of her forbidden love, grappled with the idea that their staunchest defender had chosen a different path. She stood with Lucius, but would their bond be enough to change the minds fueled by centuries of hatred? Blood had been spilled, families had been lost, and it felt as if even though they had finally had the courage to stand together, they were still miles apart. The hunters gathered, unsure of how to continue. Not only was the fate of Seraphina up for debate, but as was their community as they knew it. They had only existed as a means to destroy a common enemy, and had now seen that things could be different. It didn't have to be this way. Nevertheless, Seraphina had broken a rule that had been set in stone for centuries, and the ancients could not find it within themselves to accept her or Lucius. While the city may rest for now, Seraphina and Lucius find themselves outcast from their homes. Their love once shown as a beacon of hope, if only for a moment, now echoed as a warning to others that they may suffer the same fate. That with love there is war. The lovers disappeared into the night, but their story was far from over. The impact their bond created would ripple through time as a young huntress found Seraphina's journal decades later. Ariana, young and desperate, had too fallen for the one she had hunted. Desperate for answers, Ariana set out to find Seraphina and Lucius, if only to see what fate awaited her if she gave in to her own desires.